On May 5, 1944, the massive USS Colorado battleship left San Francisco for Pearl Harbor as part of Operation Forager, the Allied bid to seize the Central Pacific from the hands of the Imperial Japanese forces. During an extremely violent encounter in Tinian, gunner Robert E. Lee would get the first taste of war's brutality after Colorado was struck 22 times by a shore battery, causing significant damage to the ship and several losses. However, the worst was yet to come for Lee and the rest of the Colorado crew. The battleship was then ordered to serve as part of the campaign off Leyte in November, arriving just in time to be on the receiving end of a lethal assault perpetrated by the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces. As the skies darkened with Japanese attack warplanes and anti-aircraft fire, Lee fiercely defended Colorado from his gun post, with the water splattering all around the U.S. fleet from the explosions and the bullets raining down upon the American forces. Then, after a blinding flash of light, Lee turned his head up to see a Japanese Kamikaze aircraft. It was diving straight for his position, and what happened next would seal the fate of the mighty USS Colorado. An old but formidable ship. USS Colorado was a 32,600-ton battleship built at Camden, New Jersey. She was commissioned in August of 1923 and would become the central vessel in the Colorado class of warships developed by the U.S. Navy. During peacetime, she served to display American naval capabilities in Europe and protect U.S. allies and their interests. She then patrolled European waters in late 1923 and early 1924, after which she was transferred to the Pacific, where she would spend most of her long operational career. Before conflict arose in Europe, Colorado served with the battle fleet in the Pacific, participating in training and drill exercises. Still, even in peacetime, the American battleship took part in vital U.S.-led missions, spearheading the fleet's 1925 Trans-Pacific trip to Australia and New Zealand, and helping search for missing aviator Amelia Earhart in 1937. As Europe erupted and the U.S. tried to stay out of the conflict, USS Colorado was sent to Puget Sound Navy Yard to undergo a drastic overhaul of her already aging systems. It was amid this revamp that Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor opened the Pacific War, suddenly forcing the U.S. Navy to deploy all its assets for the all-encompassing conflict. As soon as Colorado was ready for action, she was ordered to report to Pearl Harbor to join the American efforts to push the Japanese back to their island. Then, from November 1942 to September 1943, she was deployed to the South Pacific to guard against a possible Japanese incursion. During this time, USS Colorado became one of the oldest ships in the South Pacific. Still, this didn't stop her from providing formidable support during the Tarawa invasion in 1943. In addition, the battleship and her crew would bravely serve during the landings at Kwajalein and Eniwetok in January and February of 1944, and the Marianas efforts in June and July, where the aging vessel provided essential support for the Allied landing operations. The battleship's luck would not run forever, though, and it drastically changed in the summer of 1944. Battle of Tinian. After finding success in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands campaigns, the U.S. military began to prepare an assault on Tinian Island, where they hoped to recapture the island of Guam that had been taken by the Japanese Imperial forces right after their surprise raid on Pearl Harbor. Another important objective for the U.S. was the northern island of Tinian. This heavily fortified landmass had been taken away from Germany and given to Japan after World War I. Taking Tinian would be a massive blow to Japanese territorial integrity in the Pacific and their morale. The Japanese, expecting an attack to come any day, reinforced the island heavily, with the landmass protected by the 50th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata. Then, on May 12, 1943, an additional 2,349 Marines of the 3rd Special Forces Unit and 950 Marines of the 56th Naval Guards were transferred to the island from Truk. The reinforcements took over the defense of the island's airstrips, taking command of all the heavy artillery guns around the airfields and the 39 heavy anti-aircraft guns, while about 4,110 soldiers of various units defended the airports and the perimeter around the island. On July 16th, the U.S. Navy began their assault on Tinian to pave the way for the 4th Marine Division, which was expected to land 6 days later. USS Colorado, 2 other battleships, 5 cruisers, and 16 destroyers were tasked with the naval bombardment before the landing operations. The shelling began with the U.S. ships raining fire over the island's airfields and beach defenses. However, Japanese resistance to the naval strikes was fierce and unrelenting, as the defending troops made formidable use of the numerous 150mm shore batteries they had at their disposal to return the fire the U.S. Navy was dealing with the island defenses. Colorado and the destroyer Norman Scott were both pummeled by Japanese shore batteries, with the former taking the worst of the onslaught. She received 22 strikes on her deck, taking the life of 43 sailors and wounding another 198. The scene was described by gunner Robert E. Lee in no uncertain terms. Many of the lost men were close friends of the young man, and the attack took a heavy toll on him. Little did he know, he would experience a far more lethal attack only a few months later. Kamikaze strikes. Robert E. Lee was a young and ambitious Navy recruit who decided to join his family's military tradition by joining the Navy as soon as he came of age on February 14, 1944. As a friendly and easygoing fellow, Lee made numerous friends soon after being appointed a gunner aboard the battleship USS Colorado on April 23rd. Still, despite his aspiring yearnings, destiny had planned a dark and cruel fate for USS Colorado and her crew. After being grounded for repairs, Colorado was tasked to resume combat off Leyte in November. By this time, the U.S. campaign to seize the Philippine Islands was in full swing, and the Japanese were ready to defend the vital region to the very last man. As the U.S. prepared to invade the island of Leyte, Colorado was sent to support the effort. But the Japanese, witnessing their overwhelming loss of territories, men, and ships, had become increasingly desperate, employing more and more suicide attack tactics in an effort to cripple the Allied advance with the limited resources they still possessed. On November 27th, the U.S. fleet supporting the invasion was surprised by a massive air raid of over 60 Japanese attack planes. George E. Menner, Lee's shipmate, recounted the event, quote, "As we went around in circles, the Japs came in and all the ships opened fire. The Louisville took a hit on the turret. The planes kept coming in on us, as we couldn't tell if our radar was working the way it should because of the land." The task force was surrounded by islands, making the sailors doubt their radar reading as more and more warplanes poured into the battlefront. Several Allied ships were severely damaged by the aircraft's fire and the kamikaze strikes. 2 Japanese aircraft then penetrated Colorado's repelling fire amid the chaos, slamming themselves into the battleship's deck in a spectacular firestorm that left U.S. sailors temporarily blind. Menner continued, quote, "At 1 in the afternoon, a couple of planes came in and hit us on the port galley deck. The explosion and machine gun bullets roared as it hit. Parts flew from the fantail to the bow of the ship, 100 feet into the air. The flash almost blinded me as it flared up all over us. I didn't know what happened for a minute. I felt a small piece of flesh hit me in the chest, and one guy in front of me complained about his knee, which was cut. I knew then that we were hit." The sailors who had not been immediately neutralized swiftly fought against the roaring flames on deck. The scene was indescribably hideous. Menner and other sailors risked their lives throwing undetonated shells overboard before they could inflict more damage to their wounded comrades. Soon, Lee's gun was hit by a part of one of the striking planes, and Menner and other men took him and other wounded sailors off the ship to be treated by Navy medics in another vessel. Lee was severely wounded, but the young sailor managed to control the pain, even joking with Menner as he was being carried out in a stretcher. Despite the brave efforts of the medics to keep the sailors alive, most of the injured men didn't make it, including Lee. Ultimately, the Japanese kamikaze strikes inflicted 91 hits on Colorado's crew, while also damaging the ship. The significant losses suffered by the American sailors would not be in vain, The Allied servicemen soon liberated the Philippines from Japanese control, and USS Colorado continued to support them until the last day of the war. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our other Dark Documentaries channels for more exciting history-inspired content, and hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest videos. Stay tuned for more.